I'm going to talk a little bit today about how we really need some good discipline when we're doing architectural work, but that it's not a cookbook. And we have to be intelligent. We have to solve real problems for real people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the foundational aspects of business architecture, but I'm also going to take you through some examples for organizations and how they approached it and how they all approach it slightly differently, while they're still consistent with the overall vision of the framework. And so we'll talk through that, and I would encourage questions as we're going. I don't mind that. Putting them in the chat is a good way to do that, or raise your hand, and we'll just discuss it and hopefully have a bit of time at the end to do the same thing. So let's get kicked off with this. Freedom within a framework. So I always like to sort of start off any talk I'm giving and say that all you're going to get here is a whole bunch of common sense, and hopefully we can make it common practice. And the first thing around common sense with regard to this is that, you know, as architects, we really do have to understand what the box looks like, what our business is all about. But we can't really do it if we don't understand the edge of the box and what's happening on the outside of the box, because we're only relevant within our own ecosystem. And if we're not making a difference and we don't appreciate what's happening out there, then we won't be successful. We'll do a lot of busy work. We might have a bunch of great models, pictures, diagrams, but we're not really making a difference. So very much focusing on the idea we have to create value in the outside world, and that nothing is important inside if it doesn't make a difference to the outside. That, again, I presume that's very much common sense thinking. So we always start with stakeholder analysis. Who are the stakeholders? What's their interest? What do they care about? What does success look like for them? And how does everything that they do connect up to what we have to do? So that's going to be something I think is going to be important. So, but if we look at business architecture today, there's so many drivers and there's so many sort of variations that might be needed for people doing business architecture work. And the real question then is, do we know the why? And I'm working with a number of organizations right now, like 5 or 6 different clients right now. And, you know, a major driver quite often is that there's a significant IT system replacement. Software is going out of license. It's no longer going to be supported. And so quite often people say, well, I'm doing this ERP or CRM type of implementation. Maybe this is a good time to rethink the business while we're at it. And hopefully it's going to be that we're not just going to try to replace functionality for functionality. We have the opportunity to do work better. If we're just changing the software, then that's not going to be much fun. You don't need a whole lot of business architecture if you're going to do that. And I hear these words all the time: business transformation, business transformation. Everybody's transforming their business. Well, that's actually a wonderful thing to do. But I've actually stopped talking about business transformation now, because I believe much more in establishing an environment of business agility. Because we got on these 5-year transformation programs, if you're lucky. I know some of the things in Ottawa have gone much longer than that. And you get through the transformation, you say, "Whew, boy, we're done. Wasn't that hard? But we got through it. I wonder what we're going to do next week." And I know the answer is we're going to start another business transformation, because we're always in transformation mode. So I think we have to really be thinking much more in terms of how do we establish an environment where we can make business changes much more easily and know the impact of change of anything we are going to touch on everything else that's taking place. We've done a lot of work with integrating companies, whole companies acquiring other ones, trying to bring them together. You need to get your business models and operating models together. Another good buzzword we're hearing is digital. I tend to talk about digitalization as opposed to digital as a technology. We are actually bringing digital capability to the work that we do, and the interface and the work we do, and the work that customers do or service recipients do. How do we make all that digital? Well, if you don't have your data act together, you don't have your process act together, then you're going to be basically building out unique capabilities which just won't work. I've got to share that data. I've got to connect the dots on the process. A lot of people are looking at things like master data management. That's a big issue. So many buzzwords right now. Customer experience management, operational excellence, design thinking, innovation. You hear this stuff all the time, but without a solid foundation to sort of understand how all the pieces move, you're going to be somewhat in trouble. That's what the little hexagon on the right says, is that, yeah, I may have to touch information. I may have to look at processes. I may have to look at technologies. I may have to look at competencies and people and motivation and organization and locations and strategy and policies and rules. All these things are in play. So if you touch one, you're going to mess up something else if you don't have your architecture act together. So there's lots of choices, lots of challenges along the way. So what are your business drivers? If you want to put a couple in the chat, I'd be happy to look at those. Why is business architecture important to the place that you work or to you personally? Let's get a couple of things in there at least and get people participating a bit. But what is it that's driving you towards looking at business architecture? Or is anybody looking towards business architecture?
And don't be shy, everyone.
One or two things in there. So I'm just curious of what's happening in Ottawa these days. Anything? Anything at all? Understanding business process flow. Thank you, Mike. Yes, because, you know, understanding how work gets done. That's really what we're saying, right? Basically, impact analysis is really, really important too. If I touch something, what else? Am I going to get any unintended consequences? Implementing a digital strategy. That's right. So we have to know what it's all about. Oh, now they're coming. Okay. Connecting the dots on end to end. Exactly. You know, I really love the expression connect the dots. And I must say, I was in Australia one time being very, very drunk after a session at the end of the day. And we all got around and said, what's our job? Well, our job is to connect the dots. And somebody said, well, we have to collect them first. So we have to collect the dots and then we have to connect the dots. And then we went through the alphabet. We can only find one more that worked, and that was correct. So we need to collect, connect, and correct the dots. That's our job, right? Investment prioritization, duplicate processes, corporate memory. Yeah, Rick, I mean, we all walk out there and nobody has any clue what happened. And SharePoint sites are not going to solve that problem, right? And Ray, tracking technology enablement back to the business priority. Again, we're connecting the dots vertically now, right? And so basically a fool with a tool is still a fool. Thank you, Diane. Good to see you here, actually. So yeah, there's a lot of good reasons why we need to sort of think about this as something that's going to be important to us, right? So really what we're saying here is that if I just take that first diagram and say, well, I have this challenge that I'm interacting with the outside world, but if I look at the inside, there's so many moving parts and there's so many things. And if I touch one, do you have any idea what else is impacted by that? And that really is the question. What is the implication of making a change? And this comes out of the Business Agility Manifesto that I worked on with John Zachman and Ron Ross to basically say, we've really got to know the impact of change. We've got to know the impact of making some adjustments. But if we don't build the connections in the first place, we can't do the tracing. And that's the challenge sometimes with business transformation, is we build all these models up because of a transformation, but then nobody manages or sustains that knowledge. And so I think we have a very big issue with regard to, do we have stewardship, ownership, whatever you want to call it? Do we have people responsible for maintaining the knowledge? Because it's an asset. And you know, otherwise we're going to go right back into another major change and start fresh every single time, because what we had before is completely out of date, right? But we still got lots of good things coming. Well-informed decision making. Customers cannot provide business requirements. No, they can't. You know, sometimes we make a big assumption that customers actually know what they want, they know what they need. A lot of the time they have no idea. Or, matter of fact, it might even be worse if one person thinks they've got all the answers without really understanding the implications on everything else that they're not expert in. So that's a bit of a challenge. And now some people have responded by doing this. You know, you have all kinds of information flowing in and out of this box in the middle, and they go crazy and build these detailed, complex models. This is a real company, a real example. And there's two lines to this. There's the top line and the bottom line. But this was their attempt, 3 months to build out a whole bunch of process models way down at the detailed level. And after 3 months, they gave up. And we were already working with them in other areas. And they said, can you look at this? I said, yeah. I said, can you explain it? I said, no. Can you? No. Okay, we just wasted 3 months drawing a diagram. But it doesn't make it an architecture just because it's a model or a diagram or a flow. Nobody can possibly cover all of this. And so we were able to solve the problem with a 4x4 matrix, which just changed all the decision making and left everything up to the individuals and so on. But we used an architected approach instead. So then ultimately, architects starting in the weeds and working their way down. Oh yeah, they already, then they go into more detail. So I really think the ultimate payoff from business architecture is the ability to modify dynamically the concepts and structures of the business itself. That's actually a John Zachman quote. And so that means we have to have the business knowledge of the business to be able to reconfigure, and also to keep business operations as the changes are formalized. It's like a good friend of mine here who works at British Columbia Hydro said that their job is to rewire their house while they still have the lights on. And I think that's the challenge, right? We can't stop everything we're doing in order to get it all figured out. We tried that 10, 15 years ago with things like information engineering, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe I'm a bit too optimistic. But, you know, we cannot just try to stop everything. We won't get the permission. So you have to sort of be somewhat evolutionary. While we have a revolutionary idea, but the implementation tends to be evolutionary. And that's why I'm going to show you the different models a bit later. But the framework within which I want some freedom is what we've got defined here. And we do have the class that Kevin was talking about before, and a bunch of people on this call have been on that class before, where we sort of look at what are the major phases. Well, we have to define the business. And quite often, architects don't get to define the business, but the architects have to really understand that business and translate it, the knowledge of it, into a form that's usable, so we can build out the appropriate models. And so, yeah, the business model might change. It's like what business are we in? In the ecosystem, I've got external pressures, I got stakeholders, people I'm interacting with. We try to derive out of that it's just something simple that we call the North Star, just a handful of objectives, and I'll talk a bit more about that, as well as strategic requirements, which could be critical success factors. So to give you an example, one organization we were working with, they said that in each country operation of this global company was given a mandate that says in the next 5 years, over the next 5 years, we want you to grow your business at 15% per year, compounded, which means double in 5 years. The only problem was the business they were in was growing at 2% per year. The industry was growing at 2% per year. So yeah, it's great to say double your business, but how the heck am I going to do that? So we help them look at what are the strategic requirements. And so two things pop to the top. Critical success factors. What? Number one, bring new categories of product to market. So new products to market. So the ability to, or the capability, if you want to call it that, the capability of bringing products to market faster and better products and more attractive products in market better. That was an absolutely critical capability that they had to have. The second one was they had to be able to identify, acquire, and integrate new companies because they're going to have to buy market share. So these strategic requirements were in response to the stated objectives that the organization had. Now, as architects, we can help package that, but we don't usually get to define what that strategy is going to be. But if I want to move into design the business, I'm going to have to understand that well so I can define my business concepts information, my business processes, my business capabilities, and my ability to measure how all that's happening. So this is usually the brownish colored section there is usually the part where as business architects, we spend a lot of time. And that's important. But if we don't know where we're going with it all, then you can have great pictures, but not much use. Then we move over to build the business. So the first thing, bottom left corner, by the way, notice all these iterate. That's what the circles are for. As we go to build the business, the first thing we want to do is start in that bottom left corner and say, what are the priorities? What is the heat map? What are the heat maps? What are the priorities? What's the roadmap? What's the portfolio? And then building out those resources in the bottom right corner of that. Then after that, we operate. We live happily ever after. We start executing the business, measuring performance according to the performance indicators that are important, tracing all the way back to the North Star, making sure we have sustainment of the models and the business, end-to-end management, and we can do continuous improvement. So this is sort of the framework that we're going to work within and try to build some of these things out. I'm going to show you how various people sort of took a different cut at what that looked like. So now I'm going to pose another question to you. If I pull a few of those things over here, what are you working on right now? What are the aspects because you have to start somewhere. You have to focus on something. You're going to have some major drivers. What are you looking at? Is it business capabilities? Is it process models and value streams, strategy, the roadmap, business rules? Just give me some of the things that you think are within your domain to tackle at this point in time. We're going to have a slow start again, are we? Or none of you do. So business processes are really quite important for everybody, for one person at least. Strategic objectives, capabilities, value streams, right? The classic business architecture stuff, information technology, business processes, capabilities, yeah. And typically you usually have a sort of one area that sort of sticks out a little bit. But I think what we're going to see in our challenge is that if you want to talk about capabilities and you don't talk about value streams or processes, good luck. You'll have a whole bunch of things that nobody can use. You want to talk about information, but you don't talk about processes and capabilities, you really don't know how that information is created, where else it's used, and if I move it, what's affected by changing the information. So objectives, benefits, Lily, objectives, benefits, outcomes, capability, value stream. Hey, good luck with all that, Lily. You got a lot of things going on, but that's great if you can get them all connected, right? Mike's saying resource planning and costing, absolutely, because ultimately all of this is going to say, well, what resources do I need, both human and technological, maybe even physical. So there's a lot of things to think about. That's really all this slide really says. So understand where you want to go first. And again, I'm going to show this a bit later. So
Roger, I noticed that, yeah. Sorry to jump in there. I noticed
go ahead.
JR has his hand up. I don't know
sorry,
if that's on purpose, JR?
Yeah, please speak up. I'm just going on, not paying attention.
No, and that was me not paying attention from Kevin's point. So no, all good here.
Okay, no worries. Okay, no problem.
So still there from before. Okay, good. We don't want Kevin coming back in, do we?
Nope, thank you.
Thank you, okay.
Hey, not nice.
Hey, I'll never get the microphone back. So I'm glad we all know Kevin well. So anyway, what we're saying here is, if we want to be effective as a business, and I mean the business architecture is a means to an end. It's not the end. Sometimes we forget that. We think we're in the business of business architecture, but really it has to make a difference. And so there's typically different perspectives that people take. Is it all about where we aim, the strategy? Is it about all the work we do, which are the processes? Is it about business information, the things we have to know? Is it about business capabilities? Because we have to build the capabilities. Otherwise, I can't do what I need to do or know what I need to know. And is it just about performance? Are we performing well? And so the different lenses that different executives are going to take different point of view. Depending on who you talk to, you might get a different answer. So that's why as architects, it's really, really hard if you only if you get the executives disagreeing on what success looks like. So that's why we got to work the North Star out so early, so we don't have to fight that all the way through our architecture. Of course, so these three things we tend to think about the most. So our process architecture, or if you want to call them value streams, you can. I'll talk a bit more about that a bit later. Information and capabilities tend to be the three main things we tend to talk about. Now, the emphasis is going to be different depending upon the challenges, the external realities. Like, do I have a major political change? Let's say, thank goodness we're not there, but if I were in the U.S. right now and I'm working in the U.S. government, this political change that's happening is going to change all the drivers, and it's going to change your emphasis. So one or more of these is going to show up. If you depending upon your industry, if I'm in the tech industry, I know my capabilities are going to be a very big emphasis. If I'm all about technology, I have to build stuff that can be easily adapted and snapped together and taken apart. If I'm in like the news business, it's going to be about information. That's where I'm going to start. What information needs do I have? If I'm a manufacturer, distributor of physical goods, it's about my processes, because I have to get my operations working very smoothly, seamlessly. Financial services, it might be a bit of a combination, right? Might be a combination of processing capability. And also, if you're an organization that's all about operational excellence, smooth operations, you're going to focus on process. If you're all about customer intimacy, you better have all the information in one place. If you're all about innovation, I want to be able to undo and redo my capabilities quickly. Of course, all of them are in play. And so the question is, where do you want to spend your time? So you come back and say, okay, if you're strategy driven, you really want to connect. I think Ray mentioned this earlier. I think that basically I want to connect what I'm doing on the front lines back up to my strategy. Well, it means I really need to understand my strategy, and different people are going to have different goals, right? Different stakeholders. So customers have a different driver than the owners or the people governing or controlling us or regulating us. The staff have a different point of view, right? By the way, notice here that we've shown staff as external stakeholders and not internal stakeholders. The reason for that is they don't have to work for you if they don't want to. They can go somewhere else. If you have a very bad working environment and they all leave, good luck with customer service. So we actually treat them as human beings, which is a remarkable approach, in their own right, so that they can be happy in what they're doing. Of course, a bit of preaching there, but basically we do have to understand the outside world, and there's going to be conflict. There's going to be conflict with regard to these different points of view. So depending upon your strategy, which one are you going to emphasize is going to be important. So what is important to those stakeholders then? The first thing we talk about is, what do we exchange with them? What information do we exchange? What permissions do we exchange? And what rules do we give them for what they're allowed to do if they're filing a claim or basically putting in their tax forms and so on? Information is flowing back and forth. It could be physical things as well, but for most people here, I think it's more information. So basically, it's this issue of, first of all, what is it that we exchange? And so this little diagram on the top left here, we tend to call this a context diagram. It's the simplest way to figure out what your business is all about. Once you scope what you're going to architect, what goes in and what goes out, what are all the things we have to do? Because if I look at this customer one, and if I receive an order request, that's going to go inside the box. And all of a sudden, the processes have to click in, the capabilities have to be used, the information has to be processed, and other work has to be done to get the product out to them, and an invoice with it. And then I got to do something with the payment. The point being is, everything coming in and out of this box has got to connect. Otherwise, it's an orphan, and we don't allow orphans in business architecture. So getting the exchanged item is absolutely critical. The next thing we talk about is, well, so what's the benefit of all of that? So quite often people focus on the thing, and as architects, it's easier to focus on what exchanges. It's much harder to figure out, so why do they care? So right now I'm working with a credit union in Alberta, and we're dealing with the mortgage business. And so they're all happily talking around the mortgage documents and the application and the forms and the stuff that goes to the lawyer. But we sort of pulled the whole thing back and said, hang on a second, what is it that the applicant cares about? And there's only a few things. One of them is, did you fund me? Or sorry, did you approve me? The next one is, did you fund me? Did my money show up on time? Why is that an important expectation of benefit? Because if you give me a pre-approval, now I can go shopping. If you approve the mortgage, now I can close the deal. If you give me my money on time when I'm closing, now I can move in. That's the benefit. It's not the document. It's not the money. It's, yes, you have to have that. But you really have to think through, so what? So what is the benefit? Because if I get all the documents right, but I don't fund you, and you're left out in the cold and you can't move in, then there's an issue. The third one of these is going to be experience. So when we're looking at value for the outside world, I want to basically look at all this stuff. So what's the experience like? What we found in this particular organization we're working with is sometimes we get the right documents, we get the money to you on time, but the customer says, thank you very much, but I'll never work with you again. I don't need to come into the branch office 4 times to sign what I think is the same paperwork over and over and over again when I'm supposed to be working. So the experience itself, it can be a digital experience or it can be a human experience. So these are the 3 aspects we look for. What is it? What do we care about? And what was it like working with you? So when we're looking for what the value is, aspects of business value, we're looking at all 3 of these particular items. Now, out of that, we can produce our North Star, the highest priority items. And so if what we tend to look at here is, this is just an example of a bank. We have a mission, we have a vision. We're going to be all about customer intimacy. But on the bottom, you can see what are the North Star statements. So what does a successful architecture do for you? It's going to allow me to increase wallet share by 5%. It's going to allow me to increase market share by 7%. I'm going to increase services by a certain number. Just sign my RSP electronically. Don't need to go to the bank branch. Great, right? Excellent. Now, however, if the experience could have been wonderful, Lily, but if they mess up the transaction, then you don't have what's good for you either. So you got all 3 of them got to be done. Anyway, decrease errors, sustain regulatory compliance. So these are the 5 things. We'd like to go for 5 because it looks pretty on the page when you draw it out. And we're going to evaluate how important is that. So we're saying wallet share and market share are about 30% of my consideration. That's the most important to me. Regulatory compliance, yeah. I'm pretty good already, so I'm not going to count that high. So it starts to show us what to emphasize. And later on, when we do prioritization, we're going to match every possibility, every possible capability, every possible process. We're going to map it against these criteria and say, let's work on the ones that move the needle the most. And it allows us to do that as architects without arguing with the business people who are already arguing with themselves. Because somebody says, I like A, I like B, I like C. And you need the criteria for making the decision. This is really, really important as an architect. Really understand what's driving the things that you're trying to do, because you're not going to be able to knock it all off in one go. So
this is Walter. Going back to the previous slide, I have a question on the number of strategic objectives. You put 5 there. That seems like good. However, would 3 be better or worse, or would 10 or 20 be too excessive?
Yeah, I think 10 or 20 certainly is too excessive because people can't focus. I mean, the nice thing about North Star, we can all see it. We can all find it. If it's 3, it tends to be a bit more skewed towards one factor. Notice here, like the customer one is wallet share and market share. And we have some other ones here too. But I can hit wallet share and market share for a little while if I don't worry about compliance. So I tend to want to sort of balance them out a little bit. It's a bit of a balanced scorecard, but it's basically built around what you're trying to do in the outside world.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Roger, there's a question from Michael, and I also want to go back to a comment from Ray.
Ray. Okay.
Michael's
Okay,
asking, are those North Star objectives related to each of the stakeholders?
Yeah, yes, they are. But what you're going to find is some of the objectives relate to more than one stakeholder. So quite often we see that something which is important to a customer is also important to an employee. No employee wants to do a crappy job every day, and a lot of them are frustrated by the same things that customers are because their technology won't allow them to do what makes sense. So the ones which are going to get the highest weighting will be the ones which affect the most number of stakeholders. So this is a negotiation, but I'd rather have this negotiation up front rather than what I'm in the middle of trying to prioritize. So my rule is always get the criteria agreed before you dive in and start arguing over various options. Ray had a comment. Yeah, need to stimulate business line interest to engage in a strategy. Yes, of course. Yeah, I agree. Demonstrate the business value of having to engage before they commit to. Yes. And this is sometimes why what we'll do is, in order to get going with this, we'll take something of a smaller scope, which is recognized as being painful, and get a good solution in place and build our own credibility, because we do have to build the credibility. Especially the larger it is, the less likely we're going to get to go in right off the top, unless we've already shown that we can add value ourselves. Definitely. So, okay, so let's keep going. Now, a few other things here. I'm coming back to the context diagram. I think you can say a lot of this is business information driven, but I would tend to call it more of the semantics vision, semantic framework, the concept model, the business concept model. And if any of you have been reading the BizBook from Business Architecture Guild, they would tend to call it a business object model. And I think in enterprise architecture, we've sort of called it that. But I really want a model that defines what are the semantics we use, what are the concepts, what are the words we use. I've been working with a regulatory body, which I'll show a little bit later, that certifies, authorizes, permits people to, change electrical systems and gas systems and elevating devices and all those types of things. They make sure it's safe. But in that organization, we had words like certification, licensing, permitting, risk, hazard, incidents, crisis, violation, penalties, fines. We had all these words all floating around, and everybody understood them differently. And so even just getting the difference between a certification, which is for an individual, a license, which is for a company, and a permit, which is for a particular piece of equipment, getting that straight was gold when we came to doing the rest of the architecture. Especially given that each of those technologies, like the electrical, gas, and so on, each of them were basically running their own mini business inside the organization. And we're trying to get a new vision, and we're trying to get a new technology stack in place to support it. We didn't want 7 variations of that technology, but we started with this concept model, which is very much based upon something called SBVR, which is a standard from OMG. And it's simple, right? It's simple to look at. In this case here, a customer places an order. The order authorizes a financial transaction, but the customer must have committed to a financial service agreement so we can price the order. The order secures a financial service. The financial service could be constrained by regulation, which comes from a regulator. These are just pure logic or pure concept of how do things work together. And this is worth its weight in gold because we don't have an understanding of what the words mean. It's going to show up. These words are going to show up in your business rules. They're going to show up in your capabilities. Matter of fact, a good capability model should be directly taken from a concept model, not a process model. And so these are the things I have to know about, right? I have to have order management. I have to have customer relationship management. I have to have agreement management. I have to have partnership agreements. Or they ask the question, is a partnership agreement the same as a financial services agreement? I'll come to this in just a moment. But understanding the words is absolutely, absolutely critical in our experience. And it solves so many problems downstream when you get different people using the same words for different things or different words for the same thing. This is, as architect, we've had this problem since day one. So I want to get that right. Now, if it's process driven, this is an example of something called, this is basically a, I'm trying to remember the right name, the civil resolution. So if somebody drives over your flowers in your front garden and it's your neighbor and you have an argument with them, the whole idea is don't take them to court. But what we do here is we actually have the ability to have a peer-to-peer, completely digital resolution service that was put in place. And if that resolution service doesn't work, then you can go to facilitation. If that doesn't work, then you can go to court. So the whole idea here was keep things out of court. So what they did, they started with the court process and they extended this process end to end to end, or the two ends at least. And so we built a whole new service with Ministry of Justice in British Columbia to be able to support a whole new way of people to interact with each other and solve things. And so we used business architecture, a complete set of business architecture artifacts to figure out what this was going to look like because it was brand new. So even though it was a new service, we needed processes, we needed capabilities, we needed information, we needed stakeholders to figure all that stuff out. And ultimately, you will build a process architecture, which basically says I have a number of different value chains, value streams. In this case, I've got things at level. So at various levels, provide consumer services, which is comprised of win new customers, which is comprised of make them aware, inform, qualify, and agree to services. Multiple levels of a process architecture, along with guiding processes and enabling processes, where the guiding processes give us the policies and rules and constraints. The enabling processes give us the reusable resources to do the work. So getting this on the page, if you're going after the process-based approach, this is going to be really, really, really worthwhile for you. So now, if you're capability driven, then you're going to start to look at, like the previous diagram I showed you, there were several stakeholders in that. I had customers, I had partners, I had a number of different stakeholders there. Well, can I have one capability at the high level called stakeholder relationship management? Can I just have different instances, slight variations for consumer versus partner versus regulator? And these are basically nested capabilities, lower, more detailed level. And I have several places where I've got agreement. So, but is a agreement with a partner different than agreement with the consumer, or is it essentially the same? Right now I'm working with an organization that that manages equipment. They auction equipment. They're the biggest in the world. They are Canadian, and they have identified something like 78 different types of agreements, because they keep acquiring companies, all of whom have different agreement types. And so we've got this major effort underway to try to bring agreements down to one set of capabilities that can be used regardless of the type of services they're providing. So they've been very capability centric because they have so many different disparate systems, all of which are falling apart. And so we're trying to sort of take that based approach. So what I'm saying here is there is no right place to start, but you are going to have to connect the dots up to the other ones. And just to sort of get this process versus capability argument hopefully out of the way once and for all, because it's been raging for 15 years, is this is a diagram that we produce working with, as part of the Business Architecture Guild process versus business architecture working team. So as Process Renewal Group, we basically proposed this, and it's been accepted, and it's now in the latest version of the BizBook, where you basically say you can have value streams at the top and stages, but that's also the process structure. And that structure can help you with your processes, go down all the way down to workflows. It can also help you define your capabilities. So in this particular case here, a value stream stage is going to have multiple capabilities in play. And the processes will need capabilities in order to do their job. And the capabilities will basically show up in processes. The point being, this is a many-to-many relationship. And so what this should blow away is that processes are subordinate to or a component of a capability. That model just does not work anymore. It never did, by the way. But it was basically put out there. If you go deep enough in your capabilities, you find your processes. What you find is process snippets, but what you won't find is end-to-end processes connected to customers and other stakeholders. They're not within the same stack. They're different stacks, and they're associated with one another. So your architecture has to be able to say, if I'm touching this process, what are all the capabilities that are used for this process to work? And if I'm dealing with this capability, what are all the processes that are required for this? I'm also working with right now with the Saskatchewan organization does driver's licensing and insurance and things like that. And what we've discovered over there is one of the things they do is they actually need identity. So they have a capability called identity management. So the identity management capability is used all over the place. But what do I want? I want one identity management capability used everywhere, as opposed to each part of the organization goes out and defines its own identity management. By the way, the driver's license is also an identity, so they're on both ends of that equation. So knowing how they fit together is going to be really quite important, right? So understanding how those things go. So Kevin, so it's safer to say that there are specific activities enabling capabilities as opposed to processes. Well, now what I'm really going to say here is a capability is more than the process. What we're saying here is identity management is the activities, the process. It's going to be the business rules and the policies. It's going to be the information that's being dealt with. It's going to be the roles that are required in order to do it. So this is why capability is quite often misunderstood as either being another form of process or a piece of technology. It's a whole bunch of those things. So Ray, you got right on. Maintaining the linkage between capability and all of the EA domain designs, including is exactly what you're hoping Qualifier will help us with. Qualifier will help us with. The thing is, there's no possible way, Ray, that, and I think you know this, that there's no possible way you can keep this in your head. You have to have the models that connect the dots. And this is why you need Qualifier.
Plus, we need various target instances of the capability models and all the other models.
Right on. Now, you think about that. It's a lot of work to do it. And this is what we're saying is what is going to be a good strategy to tackle this. But just finish the last part of these four quadrants here. Don't forget performance. Don't forget, I have to measure my effectiveness. I have to measure my efficiency. I should also measure my quality. Quality really means compliance. How well do I comply to standards? How well do I comply to regulatory requirements and so on? And agility is, well, how easily can I change something? So Kevin again, so don't use capability to guide process definition and modeling, but use processes to identify capabilities required. Well, I would actually say I can't finish my capability model if I don't have a pretty good process model. But also, if I've got a good capability model, it will help me identify my processes, especially as you go to the details. You tend, the lower levels, sort of sub-capabilities tend to map more to sub-level of processes. And that's really where where we get into trouble. At the highest level, it's a bit, it looks a bit trivial. But when you get down into the detail, 3-4 levels deep, then you can start to see it. I really need to know both. But I would never personally. Now I'm very much a process bigot. I would agree with that. I would never start with capabilities without sort of considering what are these capabilities going to be used for. And I talk about identity management. In British Columbia, we worked on identity management for British Columbia. And if I look at my driver's license and I flip it over, I'll see my health card number. So they've got one identity management, which I use for health and for driver's licensing. But it's their vision in BC to have one identity management for anything you want to do, even applying for a job in the government. We can identify who you are. Somebody pulls you over, so you're a police officer, you want to pull somebody over the side of the road. I want to know whether there's a risk in that car. So I want to connect all these things up so I can basically build it once. And what they did in BC, they set up a separate organization that only offers up a SOA service, which is identity management, and all government departments must use it or rationalize why they can't. So again, this is what we're trying to get reusables and things we can snap together or be called upon and give us very flexible business processes and very flexible business solutions. That's what we're trying to do. By the way, these measures go up and down. In other words, as I go into more detail, I should find the lower level measures connect up to what's going to be important at the top, which is my North Star measures or my strategic measures. I want to connect the dots this way too. And I can build my scorecard this way, just based upon my architecture structure. So, Ray, we also need to track the evolution of the service inventory as the implementation. Okay, yes, absolutely. So when I talk about business architecture, I'm talking about getting the processes and the capabilities and the information all in sync. But if you want to connect into more of the particular solutions, you might have a microservice strategy. If you have a microservice strategy, you will connect it to your capabilities. I don't need to connect it to my process because my capability is connected to my process. And if I connect it up to my capabilities, I can trace it, I can follow it, right? So the business case driver, the value VA, absolutely. But you've got to have that business architecture sitting in between strategy and enterprise architecture, or consider it to be part of enterprise architecture. So let's just talk a little bit about heat mapping. Okay, so really what I want to do with heat mapping, I want to look at two things. And this is not normal in a lot of places. I've seen this so many cases where I've seen people do a business architecture map, and they do the capability map, and then they heat map the capabilities, and they heat map them red, yellow, green, or some other colors as well. And so what we find is that then the capabilities that get prioritized are the ones that are most badly broken, but there's no connection to strategy. So what I want to do is I want to connect to strategy. Which are the things where if I got it, if it's really, really working well, really make a big difference to our strategy, and yet at the same time, which are the ones that are most badly broken? So and I can do this on my processes, my capabilities. I can pick information areas, and I can map any of these this way. So if I go to the right, it means it's more important to the business, more important to the North Star. And if I go to the top, I can say this particular area, whichever domain I picked on, is far from where I need it to be. So if I'm going to give you an example of something using the process domain, because that's sort of where I come from. But you can do it for other things as well. What I'm saying here is that if I go to the right and try to triage this a bit, the processes on the right, like 5, 7, and 9, are really, really important to achieving our strategy. The processes on the left, yeah, we got to do them, but we don't have to be world class. Whereas the ones over here will differentiate you. The ones in the middle, you've got to be good at it, and maybe best practice, maybe the same as everybody else, but being better doesn't pay off. In other words, if you're the best in the world, the people you're dealing with don't need you to be the best in the world. You've just spent a lot of money becoming best in the world on something which is not strategically differentiating. So this is why you need the North Star. The processes or capabilities you want to look at in the right will be the ones that will move the needle on the North Star the most. So we actually have formal ways of mapping all this stuff out. Whereas the ones over here are really quite interesting. So let me tell you a little bit of story about number 8. A good friend of mine is he's president of Canada Lands Corporation. He's Ottawa based, but Canada Lands Corporation is in Toronto. He's CEO of that organization, and they basically take federal lands and properties and repurpose them and sometimes develop them and put them out in the marketplace on behalf of the Canadian government. I went to his office one day and he said, "Oh, you come up to the floor higher than you normally come up to. I want to show you something new. It's really, really cool." I said, "Okay, that's fantastic." So, by the way, the top row here means that you're badly broken, right? And so, he brought me into the office, And he pulled out his iPhone and started playing with his iPhone, and the windows started self-tinting. It's sort of like what you might see on the 787 aircraft, right? So the windows are self-tinting. And I said, well, oh, that's really cool. He said, yeah, it was really expensive, but it's really cool. And I said, well, why did you do it? He said, well, it was getting really hot in here in the afternoon. So my response was, did you really have to be world class in having self-tinted windows? Or could you have put blinds on the windows for much less money? Did you really need to do that? So if you focus on 8 as being broken, but not important, then you're going to waste your money. And the problem is you're going to have people in your business who are all pitching to do the number 8s. And so, whereas if I wanted to spend my money in the right place, I should spend my money on number 9. That's where my money should go. By the way, the executives love this page. It really goes over well because they can see on a simple page where they should be paying and spending their attention. This is the outcome from linking the strategy to the architecture, and now I can come up with priority. Of course, I have to figure out, exactly what it means to change number 9 into something better. But if I'm going to if I take process number 9, this is the key thing now. I'm going to have to look at this diagram. Let's say process number 9 is this red process over here. Well, that's great. If I go try to fix that process, I'm going to have to look at which capabilities does that process use. It might use a bunch of them, but these 2 that it uses are also red. So if I want to fix this process, and I've also got information area where we're weak too. So I've got to look at the other 2 areas. And here's the problem. If basically this process impacts this capability, which is not working well as far as this capability is concerned, I also have to look at all the other processes that capability touches, because if I fix it for the red one, I might make it worse for the blue ones. And so this is what Ray was talking about. You really have to know the connections here, because before I launch into fixing that capability, I've got to know what's the impact on everything else that I'm doing. And so this is where your roadmap really would come out of it, right? So, this to me is really ultimately where the payoff comes. No, and I talked about this earlier. If I am, yes, the law of unintended consequences. And by the way, I mean, without unintended consequences, there's a whole bunch of people working in our field who wouldn't have a job, because we wouldn't have more and more things to do, because my favorite expression says the main cause of problems is solutions. So we keep generating that. But there's many things to look at as well. I think that's the point here, that it could be your policies are messed up. It could be your technologies are messed up. It could be your workflow or your information quality is off. It could be that you've got the wrong incentive for people, or they're not trained to do the work. All of these things need to be questioned. So if I really want to talk about a capability, I want to talk about the whole business capability where all of these things might play. I realize I'm being a little bit idealistic. So let's have a bit of a look at this. So let's get into some of the examples. How well aligned are these domains? Some are more complete or more mature than others? I bet they are. So let's just walk through a few examples here. This is the technical safety regulator that I talked about before. And so this organization, given that their technology stack was going out of sync, given that they keep getting more technology areas to manage, and they kept sort of just bolting them onto the side of the business, they realized they had to really step back and see what was going on. So the approach there was, number one, build a comprehensive context model. In other words, don't go inside the box, look at all the exchanges on the outside, and then build out the concept model so everybody had a common language to work with. It was only then we could start to look at the process architecture, and that process architecture got drilled down a couple of levels, and then we then looked at all of those and said, well, what are the requirements for these processes to be successful? And we did that for, I think, 19 out of about 30 high-level processes. And then we looked at what the capability requirements were for each, and we rationalized those so we had shared capabilities. Then they went to IT requirements, went out to RFP, and they hired a firm to come in and do that, to do the actual work. It was interesting. It was so together that the firm that came in, when they won the bid, when they demonstrated, they actually demonstrated solutions because the models that they were given were strong enough for them to infer what the solution might start to look like. And everybody was on the same page. So then they acquired and implemented, and now they're in the process, well, they're in the process, still process of doing that because they're in phases, but now they're also trying to make sure that there's a cultural realignment, not only inside the company, but also in the marketplace that you know, as they move from a model of just pay for licenses where they make all their revenue to basically going to empowerment, accountability, and much more of a safety culture in the marketplace. And so this is what they did. So their models look basically like this. The context, one of two context models is on the left-hand side. And so we have things at the top like licensed contractors, contractors who aren't licensed yet, training providers, qualified professionals, asset owners, all the things that they exchange. Then inside the box, they had to make it happen somehow. And then on the right-hand side is the concept model that basically says a contractor obtains a license. A license is required for a permit. A bond is required for a permit. A permit is required to practice regulated work, is required to perform regulated work. It's simple logic, but they argued it. There was a lot of arguments over what these were. Because if we didn't get this straight, though, it would have showed up in everybody giving different sets of requirements for what really needed to take place. And of course, this concept model is the foundation for the information model and the database structure as you go from concept to logic to physical models. They help both of those things. But it was critical for processes too, because we look at something saying permit. Well, then we ask the question, what are all the processes that deal with permits? What's the life cycle of a permit? From it doesn't exist till it's over, all the things that happen in between. So we're able to sort of ask the questions about what capabilities do we need? There's a permitting capability. There's information and processes all sort of touched on this. But that was their approach. Let's look at another one. Public Service Agency. This is a transit corporation. Again, I'm in British Columbia here. BC Transit Corporation was moving from very, very separate roles. And so in order for transit to work in British Columbia, other than TransLink in Vancouver itself, you have municipalities who determine what routes the bus takes, what schedule the bus takes, where to put the bus stops, where to pave the side of the road to do things. That's the municipality's responsibility. We have the Transit Corporation that sets all the rules, sets the fares, and does things like that. And they're also they're in the governance over everything that happens. And we have the bus operating companies. So there's something like 60-something municipalities, more than 50 bus operating companies. And in order to have effective transit, they all have to work together. So we help them facilitate the coming together of the business architecture for this. And we had workshops of 140 people at a time, I swear. It's like we had to break them into component parts, have it all work together properly. It was a real feat in facilitation. But at the end of it, doing the stakeholder analysis was really, really key. Because at the beginning, people were saying, well, we all know the cleaner buses and friendly bus drivers are really important. So why don't we focus on that? And then somebody then asked the question, well, does that mean if you've got a clean bus and a friendly bus driver, that people will get on it, even if it doesn't take them where they want to go? Even it means it's really inconvenient, so they would prefer to drive their car. So this whole stakeholder analysis, including municipalities and bus operating companies and employees, was done first to figure out how do all the dots have to sort of connect up logically? Then building out the process architecture, which I'll show you in a moment. Then doing the prioritization to focus on the top issues and doing capability design for the top ones over a period of time. IT requirements, focusing on data, and then a multi-year program of change, and of course, the business case and funding. Now, they started out with a $40 million IT initiative, and they ended up with a $25 million business change initiative to accomplish even much more. So that made Treasury Board really quite happy. But let me show you what it looks like. On the top of this is their processes, about 120, 130, I think, something like that. On the bottom, you've got the capabilities, technical capability, and also the information areas. So this was going to be their ideal world. This is where they wanted to go at the end of the day. Now, where were they when they started? All red, 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 red. Everything was pretty much red. There wasn't much green on the page. So he said, well, what's our program going to look like? I said, well, in a year, I want to be some green in some capabilities and some processes. In 2 years, in 3 years, in 4 years, in 5 years. So even after 5 years, not everything would be done, but at least they knew what they were going to roll out and exactly how they were going to handle it. Major, major breakthrough. Otherwise, they would have just basically wasted a whole lot of money purely on updating their IT infrastructure. So another one, I got 2 more to do, and then we're going to stop and do some more questions. This one is the food and snack category leader. And so in this particular one, what we're trying to do was integrate a large acquired subsidiary into the main operations. And I can tell you, this was Mars Canada integrating Wrigley when they acquired Wrigley. And so first thing they had to figure out is what is their confectionery strategy going to be, as we have this new lines of business we didn't have before. Then they basically looked at the processes from both sides and basically said, where are the differences? And are we essentially doing the same thing, but maybe doing it slightly differently? But then they went right into organization design. And you didn't see that on the previous ones, because they had to get the organization working as quickly as they possibly could. And then they basically then looked at, again, standard operating procedures, because they had to get people working really well. They got by with their own IT stack for a while, and then they said, now let's look at, can we bring these two things together based upon the processes and the organization. They reached out to the customer to change how the account executive to Loblaw, and Wrigley would as well, but there's no point having both of them. So reaching out to customers, saying, how is it going to be different? How will we work with you now? They then established a quality management program to make sure the processes could be sustained and they could withstand audit, and because the auditors love those maps. And then they basically gradually worked on the culture change. So again, my point here is that they did everything in the framework, but they did it in a different way because they had to solve a business problem as they're going forward. And so as a result of this, they built, so there's what they do in the middle, operate the business. S&OP means sales and operational planning, which is local, weekly, daily planning. And then there's the corporate and segment guidance. So corporate guidance meaning the corporation in the US basically doing things. So certain work got done in different places. And underneath, the enabling services were the local enabling services, and the global enabling services came through Mars Corporate Services, which is a 7,000 person organization. So basically, what we did is we built this cake, and in the middle, we tried to make it very relatable. And so our client here, and we used it ever since, our client here called this the marketecture. So because when they showed the detailed models to the executives, they basically got booted out of the office. Nobody wanted to hear it. So they tried to put little 3-dimensional pictures on the page, make it something that's really, really simple for them. What do? We make, we sell, we listen. And these are where the main things that we do and how they fit, so that it could be communicated and sold to business people. And since that time, it's been working exceptionally well. The people in the business now are taking much more seriously what happens on the business architecture side. Okay. Now I'm going to show the last one. This is this vehicle asset company, the people who basically run auctions and so on. Without naming names, they really, really have done incredibly well. And their biggest problem is they've done so well, they keep acquiring other companies with other technologies and other views and different ways to market. And so I mean, this was all like physical auction stuff. They acquired an online auctioneer. And the business models are really, really different. And so, but right now, I mean, when they started out, they started looking at the IT application architecture because there's so much redundancy and they couldn't get the data being shared. But we sort of pulled them back a bit when they asked us to help out a bit. And we said, let's just step back and say, what are all the concepts? Because you're trying to integrate technologies, but we don't even know what the data is that could be common or should be different. And then from the concept model, we said, well, what are the capabilities we needed? Because the microservices architecture team in EA were well off to the races, having not done any concept definition, not looked at any processes, and not done any capability design. You know, they're off doing microservices. So we had to sort of bring them back and realign them. And then we did the process architecture third in the list, whereas other times we did it on first in some of the other examples. And now, because of this, they're really starting to re-examine, do I need all these products and services? Or can I rationalize them and bring them down to fewer? And so now we're pushing them back to the microservices architecture after that. Change program and organizational renewal, because everything's happening so fast. And I must admit, in this one, we're just trying to catch up to the business, because if we let the business go, they're going to mess it up. And so what we're now fighting is, what is the value of business architecture in here? And it's a tough battle, because you've got different people in the business, all of whom are trying to stake their claim for future promotions in the business. So we have to be incredibly patient going through all of this. We're starting to get some traction, but it's hard. It's really, really hard to sort of sort this out. So again, so different approaches, but don't forget the framework. All these things still need to get done, but we get them done in maybe a different order, a different depth, right? Is it just a kilometer wide, centimeter deep? On some parts, you have to go a kilometer deep as well. You're going to have to think through what the right strategy is around architecture. So the closing slide, and we'll have a few questions, I think, is that this is where this expression came from, freedom within the framework. This is Erich Fromm. Back in 1935, he said this: true freedom is not the absence of structure, letting employees go off and do whatever they want, but rather a clear structure, but it enables people to work within established boundaries in an autonomous and creative way. And I think as business architects, we have to sort of understand the discipline and the profession, but do what makes sense with regard to the business that we're dealing with right now. So that's the presentation.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Roger. Very much appreciated.